what the status is of Blackwater and its current iteration Academy, and the culpability of big corporations like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and others. And then the other was to Dante about, well, she was thanking him for being about something, but if there's been any pushback from Scahill or anyone else from the NFL for him speaking out. So maybe we can start with you, and then I'll go on.
I haven't had anyone speaking out about me or any coaches or general managers or owners come up to me, but I will say that I just signed with the Redskins 2-3 weeks ago, and I on my Twitter page I talk a lot about politics, definitely more so than anything else. And there's already been 3 stories written about me and my policies on war, on just everything. So I think from that aspect, I do have to be cognizant of what I tweet, which I try to always do initially anyway. But to answer your other question, there's an interesting story. So a couple years ago, I was playing with the Ravens, and we were playing the Texans in Houston. And before the game, I'm warming up, and the camera guy's in my face, and I'm just running around doing my thing, warming up. And I look up at one of the rafters, and I see a huge sign for Halliburton. So I looked at the camera guy, and I'm like, why does Halliburton have a sign in the NFL stadium? And he tells me this, I'm a grown man. He tells me this, don't worry about Halliburton, just play football.
What?
And that's what I get a lot all the time. People that really don't want to hear athletes speaking out on politics. They want us to talk about football and other things other than politics. But I do it all the time. And I just that when you brought up that question, that's the first story that came to my mind. So I don't know if that would suffice.
There actually is a connection. Do people remember Pat Tillman? Pat Tillman was this, all-star NFL player who enlisted in the U.S. military after 9/11 and believed that what he was doing was fighting to defend his country. And Pat Tillman was killed in Afghanistan in what was determined internally to be a friendly fire incident. And yet General Stanley McChrystal, who was the JSOC commander at the time, and other senior U.S. military officials said that Pat Tillman had been killed in a battle with the Taliban, and they used Pat Tillman's name to promote the war and to create this idea that there was this ultimate warrior who had been a football player and this all-American guy who had joined up with the military and went, and he died nobly in battle. And Pat Tillman's death had been covered up. His family is still fighting for justice in that case. And Pat Tillman's family has come out and published some of his internal emails and notes back to friends where Pat Tillman realized very early on in his deployment that we're not fighting for freedom, we're not fighting to defend our way of life, that it was sort of a fool's errand, and probably would have been someone like Dante, except with the added credibility of having been in the military, who would have been speaking against these wars. And he died, and then they covered up his death, and in a really despicable way used his name to promote a cause that, by all accounts, he seemed to be against once he realized what he was a part of there. It's interesting, too. It's not just the NFL, it's Hollywood. You look at Zero Dark 30, and the Pentagon has a whole division set up to liaise with Hollywood. And they will provide them with all of these war toys to make their films as long as the politics are in sync with the propaganda mill at the Pentagon. And we are bombarded with these images and the kind of glorification of the warrior. You know that after the Bin Laden raid, the Disney Corporation tried to trademark SEAL Team 6 because they wanted to manufacture action figures and to make movies and all this stuff. It's the commodification of war, which leads me to the question that you asked about Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. We had a point in Iraq where there were more private contractors than there were actual uniformed soldiers. And many of those, we're here in Miami, which is one of the most diverse cities in the United States, people from all throughout Central and Latin America. Almost every nation in Central and Latin America had people deployed in Iraq on the U.S. payroll working for private corporations, including democratically elected governments, like the government of Chile, that was against the war. The U.S. found a backdoor way to deploy Chilean troops to Iraq in contravention of the will of its democratically elected government. How? by using Blackwater to go in and hire Chilean mercenaries, some of whom were commandos under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, and then deploy them in a war that their home government was against. We turned it into War Inc., War Incorporated. And if you go online and you watch Northrop Grumman or Boeing or Lockheed Martin commercials, they're very open about saying we're a parallel national security state. Blackwater has gone through multiple rebrandings and renamings, and now they're called Academy with an I. It's French. And they're still working, under President Obama, still working for the CIA, the State Department, and the US military. And Eric Prince, the owner of that company, the great super patriot, left the United States and now has relocated to the United Arab Emirates and lives in Abu Dhabi, and is continuing to engage in mercenary activity targeting Africa in particular. And I think that what we're seeing a sort of throwback. Part of why we called this Dirty Wars was not to be the masters of the obvious. There's no such thing as a clean war. But because it's reminiscent of a different era. In the 1980s, when the US was involved with all these dirty wars in Central and Latin America, the 1960s, when the US was engaged in trying to tamp down or to crush independence movements in Africa. Of course, the US deeply implicated in the killing of Patrice Lumumba in Congo and trying to quash other democratic or anti-colonialist movements. And I feel like we're sort of moving into an era now where we have corporations that have been funded to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars in US taxpayer money, that have built up an infrastructure where they have their own private armies. We have, under Democrats and Republicans, an unaccountable national security state. We have nothing resembling a real debate in this country. And unless we wake up and look at how far across the line we've come, we're going to be in big trouble. For young people here tonight, I would recommend that you go online tomorrow or over the course of this weekend and find the video of Representative Barbara Lee, who is a congressperson from California and was the only member of Congress to vote against the authorization for the use of military force, which was passed just days after 9/11, when you had this sort of jingoistic fervor that was gripping the country. We need to get revenge, we need to strike back. And can you imagine being Barbara Lee, who's an African-American member of Congress, who is the only member of either House of Congress who stands up and votes against the blank check that was given to the Bush administration to effectively declare the world a battlefield? And she was trembling when she gave her speech. Can you imagine being her in that, for people that have a living memory of this? And she said, we cannot be in a perpetual state of war, and someone in this body, in the legislative body, has to stand up and say no, that we cannot react out of fear because it's going to have far-reaching consequences. And she was right in the same way that Senator Russ Feingold of Wisconsin was right when he was the only senator that voted against the Patriot Act. We have given away so many of our basic liberties in the name of security. And it's devastating. It's a devastating blow to it tatters the fabric of our democratic republic when we allow the government to dramatically overreach, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, out of fear. It's easy to be against a cartoonish villain like Dick Cheney, when he's in power. Where your principle is tested is when someone like President Obama is in office, Nobel Peace Prize winner, constitutional law expert by trade, Democratic president, who makes it all sound very neat and ties it all up and says it's legal, legitimate, and the right way to wage wars. That's when your principle is actually tested.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.